If both sides wanted a face-saving language, linguistic structure that allowed them to exit the war, this might do it. But that's a pretty big if, because according to far-right parties who support Netanyahu, if he takes a deal before Hamas is well and truly completely smashed along with the rest of Gaza, his government might fall. And Hamas have said repeatedly that the deal they want is a full ceasefire and a withdrawal. Now, this does point towards that withdrawal, but not immediately.
That's the BBC's Jeremy Bowen reporting the U.S. and other mediators want to avert a full-scale invasion. This is SRN News.
The following program is sponsored by the law offices of Patrick L. Smith. This is the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. Get ready with your legal questions and call Patrick now. 877-943-9673. Again, that's 877-943-9673. The law office is open. And now your host, Patrick Smith.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. I'm your host, Attorney Patrick Smith, and we are live. Today is Saturday, June 1st. That's right, fam. We made it to June. We'll be with you for the hour to get your thoughts on the latest news regarding President Trump's conviction. Obviously, the big news topic of the week. So we'll be holding our own people's court. We'll get the people's opinion regarding this conviction of a former president. And that's right. It's official. According to ABC News, or AP News, rather, former President Donald Trump became the first president to be convicted of a felony this Thursday in the great state of New York when they found him guilty of all 34 counts in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election through a hush money payment. So, very controversial case, controversial for lots of reasons, controversial for the fact that it involves a former president, controversial because it's the apparent weaponization of our judicial process in a political season. And we want to get your thoughts on how the law and politics are mixing here. 877-943-9673, 877-943-9673. For those of you new to the show, I'm Attorney Patrick Smith, local Central Florida attorney, offices to serve you throughout the state. If you want to set up your complimentary estate planning consultation with me for our $75 will or our non-tax trust packages for $695, the office line 844-PATRICK, 844-PATRICK, or 844-728-7425. So I wanted to get insight from the primary sources, and yesterday I saw some tweets from a very good friend of mine, Senator Jonathan Martin, who is actually joining us now on the hotline. Good morning, Jonathan. How are you, buddy?
Good morning, Patrick. I'm doing all right.
So for those I'm doing fine. For those of you unfamiliar, Senator Martin represents Florida's 33rd district down in Lee County and is actually the chair on the Committee for Criminal Justice, correct?
Correct.
And also a former prosecutor. So if anybody knows about prosecuting crimes, it would be you. So what are your initial takeaways? And I saw your tweet calling for or saying you would support a special session for legislation to address this issue. So your initial thoughts and kind of what would be the goal in this special session?
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for having me on this morning. Good morning to all your listeners. So I said I would support a special session. There's three individuals that can call for a special session: the governor, the speaker of the House, the Senate president. And there's no legislation currently in mind, but there's a couple ideas. Look, what happened the other day was a long time coming. We saw it if you were paying attention to the trial, if you were paying attention to what Donald Trump was being charged with, you knew that there was a high likelihood that he was going to be convicted. So this wasn't a surprise for those that were paying attention. But ultimately, what the other day showed was that there was no opportunity for a not guilty verdict, for an acquittal. He was charged with 34 counts of criminal bookkeeping, which it's an interesting type crime. It it presupposes that there was a crime committed, and then the bookkeeping error or the bookkeeping transaction was done criminally, and that's what was being charged with. So even though much of the other crimes were either federal or the statute of limitations had run on them, this was kind of a catch-all type crime. So,
well, and as I understand it, the particular charge that he was initially hit with was a misdemeanor, the falsifying of business records charge. That the only way it could be bumped to a felony if it was done in inclusion or in the effort to commit another crime, and that's when this influencing an election charge sort of came out of the woodwork. Isn't that how that developed into a felony?
yeah, that's a pretty good explanation. It's a bizarre crime. I'm unfamiliar with a similar type of crime in Florida. I've never charged anything like that in Florida. But also, what was really interesting is one of the underlying crimes was a federal FEC election crime. So the state was using a federal crime, what they believed was a federal crime, because again, they're not federal prosecutors. It's not a federal court. They have no jurisdiction over federal law. They used federal law as the underlying offense to enhance this misdemeanor to a felony, which is just bizarre.
Well, so have you ever personally, I mean, as a politician, politics is fair game. It's a rough business. And have you ever sort of experienced personally any sort of weaponization of the judicial process against you as a candidate?
Oh yeah, the first day that I announced that I was running for Florida Senate 2 years ago, somebody filed a bar complaint against me and filed criminal charges against me for battery, which thank God the whole interaction was on video, and the state attorney that was investigating it from another circuit, because I used to work at the one down here as a prosecutor, so another state attorney's office investigated it, and cleared everything and explained like, no, there was no crime that took place.
So it sounds like this
political.
Is nothing new under the sun. Yeah. So I think what makes this case unique, number one, it's a president. And one of the funniest comments that I heard on this was, how did they find a jury of his peers? How did they get 12 former presidential billionaires to sit on a jury for this guy? And I thought that was pretty funny. So the point being, I think when you go to that jurisdiction, you're right. That's a jurisdiction that kind of seemed to have an axe to grind against the former president. So it does seem a little biased. So I think that's what makes it unique here is the fact that not only was it this normal sort of, we're going after you politically through the judiciary, and we're going to give some prior examples here later in the show involving former President Bill Clinton and former presidential candidate and Senator John Edwards. It's the fact that it was so successful, 34 counts. And then I don't know if you heard the news, but apparently yesterday I saw in my show prep that he raised $34 million yesterday, the former president, and that's $1 million per count.
I think it's up to over 50 million in the 24-hour period.
$50 million for losing the case.
So when you watch the rulings of the judge on evidentiary issues before trial and the middle of trial, it didn't matter if the jury was the most conservative jury on the planet. In order to get sworn as a juror, first of all, you have to say that if you are aware of the defendant or any facts outside the courtroom, that you will disregard your understanding of all those facts and you will put those aside and you will listen to only the facts and evidence presented in the courtroom.
Okay.
So even if they're conservative, the judge made rulings that no reasonable jury could get to a not guilty. If they're trying to do their job. And the jury panel was coming from an area that is no bastion for conservatism or MAGA country by any stretch of the imagination. And they came up with a verdict that I think was reasonable based on what was presented. But the jury instructions, the law that was allowed to come before the court, the case should have been dismissed well before a jury was ever sworn. It shouldn't have ever been filed if you had an ethical prosecutor. It was a logical conclusion based on what we saw. I mean, the evidence that was not allowed to come in because the judge, who we know he had his own biases, his daughter was making money literally off of the trial. I can't think of anything that would be a greater reason to recuse a judge. His family was literally profiting. She's a political consultant and was profiting off of her dad being the one to serve as the judge in the Donald Trump trial.
Well, I think you just answered my next follow-up question. If the same facts, but here in the great state of Florida, number one, do the charges even get brought, or are they dismissed? And if they are brought, do you think he's convicted if this trial occurs in Florida?
Well, first of all, I'm unaware of a crime in Florida that's structured like the one in New York.
Right, you're right. There really isn't, but presume
there's due process requirements.
Yeah,
like,
so for a hypothetical, presume there is.
Yeah, the jury, you can find pockets of conservative or liberal jurors here in Florida. Our circuit here in the 20th Circuit that I tried numerous cases in. We have 5 counties. I had very diverse jurors from when I was in Glades County or Hendry County or Lee County trying cases. And those are vastly different jurors from Miami or Orlando or, Pensacola that's largely military. You can find pockets of, you can judge shop, which we see a lot of times when there's a law that's passed that either liberals or Republicans don't like. They'll go and judge shop and file an injunction in federal court where they're likely to get a judge that's going to agree with them. You can also juror shop, and that's basically what the Democrats did with this. They found a very liberal city that was not likely to have conservatives or people that would empathize with President Trump, and that's where they brought the charges, and they did it in that geographic area for a reason.
Yeah, and what makes me concerned is the retaliation, because if this is the new wave of politics we're going into, where it's going to be the politicization of the judiciary, I think the judiciary now becomes a weaker arm of the government and less independent, and I don't like the way that feels for the sake of our republic. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent we're setting. So they're obviously going to appeal. What do you think happens on appeal?
Well, what's interesting, and this is the one case out of the 4 where President Trump is currently facing charges that I'm the most concerned about regarding appeal. And when I say concern, I mean getting to a fair judge and a fair appellate bench sooner. So he's convicted. He'll be sentenced 4 days before the Republican National Convention, which is interesting. And then he will then have the opportunity to appeal that sentence. Or he has time right now to appeal the conviction. But generally, the appellate courts, I don't know what New York law is, they require finality. So they may not even take up appeal until the sentence takes place. So he won't even get to start that appeal process.
Yeah, that's right.
Until July.
Yeah, that's right. But
then
also the timing is
the
really
first
suspicious.
level of appeal. Yeah. So and there could be a pre-sentencing investigation, which, will generally take a month, 2 months, 3 months. That's you're stretching it there. But what's interesting is the next level of appeal is to a group of people that are appointed by Democrat judges, have been appointed by Democrat judges, from a group of people that were elected in New York. So you have judges who are politicians who are then appointed by Democrat politicians. No confirmation process as far as, like the U.S. Senate has confirmation power for Article 3 judges, federal judges across the country. There's no confirmation process like that. So you have no Republicans are part of approving these judges in New York on the first level of appeal or on the next level of appeal.
All right. Well, Jonathan, I know you're on your way to an event, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I do appreciate you making the time to call in and provide some insight as a former prosecutor and chair of our criminal justice committee for our Florida State Senate. And you keep up the good work down there in our 33rd district. Okay.
Thanks, Patrick.
All right, buddy. Have a great day. Bye-bye. All right, you're listening to the Attorney Patrick Smith Show, 877-943-9673, 877-943-9673. I'm Attorney Patrick Smith, and that was our very special guest, Florida State Senator Jonathan Martin, and representing Florida's 33rd District down there, former prosecutor, as I said, and chair of the Criminal Justice Committee here in the Sunshine State, providing his insight, and lots of you want to provide your insight. Let's go to a very patient Mike in Clearwater. Mike, welcome to the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. How can we help you today?
Hey, Patrick.
Mike.
The one thing that I had a real problem with in the trial is if they say, okay, the 12 people have to agree unanimously. Well, if the judge goes in there and says, well, here's how we're going to do this. If 4 of you can think that he's guilty of crime A and 4 of you think that he's guilty of crime C and 4 of you, we'll consider that that you all agreed on the same thing. My God, Patrick, how can they get away with this? What I understand is the way the jury instructions were given, nobody could have been found not guilty.
Well, I think that was Senator Martin's point, was that the way the judge structured the trial, it was basically structured to not have any other result than a guilty verdict. And I think that's the same critique you're making, is that under the jury instructions by the judge to the jury, that if that's how it was interpreted and how it was implemented by this particular judge, was that not just predetermination of the verdict by the judge?
So can we have an investigation open on this judge and prosecute? Because obviously they're corrupt. There's no doubt in my mind now that they're corrupt. How do we get them removed from the bench, and how do we get the prosecutor? Well, the prosecutor they have to vote for, but how do we get this judge out of there, possibly?
Well, I mean, as far as, I don't know the New York State process, but there's regulatory bodies, I'm sure something like a Judicial Qualifications Commission, but I think the appeals process would be the more immediate thing, just to review the judge's actions and see whether or not it was an abuse of power, whether it was an error or what was done wrong, or if it was appropriate. I mean, everyone sort of jumps to it must have been wrong, but everything here under the current laws in New York may have been completely within the judge's powers.
Right. I see what you're saying. So it's kind of like where, okay, well, the law allowed me to do this, and I was doing this in the process of doing my job, so they can hide behind it, basically. That's absolutely amazing. And then one other question I have, Patrick, if Trump ends up winning, which I think he will, aren't these folks going to have egg all over their face? If it backfires, wouldn't that also be a wonderful thing?
Well, I think egg on their face would be the least of their concerns. I mean, if you think about President Trump's first term, when he had a second term to be concerned about, President Trump in a second term where there is no tomorrow, that's a very dangerous President Trump, and dangerous not in a dangerous to our democracy or our republic kind of way, but a man who has every opportunity and the power to seek revenge against political opponents. And that should make a lot of people nervous. I mean, the fact that you are risking a war with arguably the most powerful position in the world. So that could be extremely, extremely dangerous. And I think you're right. I think you're right to be concerned about the egg on your face, as you put it, Mike.
Just one final comment. Some people might say, well, dangerous as it is, it's a good thing, right? Because if these people tried to do it to him, so now when the shoe's on the other foot, maybe if they've proven that they're willing to play dirty, maybe we should play dirty a little bit.
Well, but we've seen this before. I mean, we've seen this before, Mike. So go back to Ken Starr. And when President Bill Clinton, he was impeached and he was tried for perjury. And there's a great article, by the way, in ABC News that lays out a great comparison and contrast to the John Edwards trial and to the former President Bill Clinton, Paula Jones trial. And basically the crux of that matter was, because these guys were actually sued and these were settlements, their payments were okay. Because the President Trump thing was done quietly, that appears to be the incriminating part, according to this article. And I think that's it. It's almost like the precedent that we're setting here is, if you face public humiliation by being sued, whether or not you did it, and you pay someone off under those facts, that's okay. But if you try to preserve your family's dignity and take care of something quietly, an indiscretion, an alleged indiscretion, quietly, that appears to be the criminal part. At least that's one take on it. And if you read the article, that's the key difference between these three scenarios. There was no suit by any former adult film star against President Trump. This was basically just a quiet, out of court, pre-trial settlement, pre-suit settlement. So anyway, Mike, I appreciate your call, and you made some fantastic points. So we appreciate you listening.
Thank you.
All righty. Have a great day. All right. 877-943-9673. We're discussing all things Trump conviction related. If you have a thought or insight on the way the courts ruled, the way the courts are being used in this current presidential cycle, 877-943-9673. I'm Attorney Patrick Smith, and this is the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. We kicked off the show talking to our current Florida State Senator representing District 33, Senator Jonathan Martin, who's a former prosecutor and providing a former prosecutor's insight. But who better to provide insight on New York charges of a former presidential candidate than a New York attorney? So joining us now, our friend and former guest from our Estate Planning Around the Nation segment when we did our Florida and New York comparison, ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Ken Henry. Happy Saturday, Ken. How are you doing?
Good. Good morning to you, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, and I'd be honored to have you kind of provide the New York attorney's perspective, because, you know, you heard Jonathan and I kind of say there's no Florida equivalent of these types of charges and the way that this was structured, but you heard Mike's criticism of the way the judge sort of structured the jury instructions so that it was impossible to not have a guilty verdict. So maybe just provide some insight on what charges the president was charged with, and sort of what exactly sort of the sentences he could be looking at might be.
So there were 34 charges against Mr. Trump for falsifying business records under the first degree. And that's only a Class A misdemeanor. So we've heard the word bootstrap or whatnot, but to make the actions rise to the level of a felony, they also had to show that Mr. Trump falsified the records to conceal a second crime. And when you do that, it becomes a Class E felony. So interestingly, there were three categories of records that Trump was accused of falsifying: invoices for legal services, checks for paid legal services, and ledger entries for expenses. The judge's instructions to the jurors gave them several choices for an underlying crime. Interestingly, falsifying other business records, breaking the federal election law, Federal Election Campaign Act, which we've heard many times, and also submitting false information on a tax return. Interestingly, again, the judge said they had to find unanimously, all 12 jurors, that he falsified the records. But on a different note, he said that they did not have to unanimously agree on the underlying charge, which I find interesting and candidly couldn't find any other place where that's been done in that manner.
Well, and that was critical because that's what made the misdemeanor a felony, was when you found the underlying charge, right?
That's correct. So the judge said it could be 444, which again, not to take a political position, but it doesn't seem, as a defendant, when you don't know what you're defending, that seems to be constitutionally unfair.
Have you ever heard of a judge giving jury instructions like that before? I've never heard of any sort of jury instructions like that.
I have never heard of that. In doing some research, I couldn't find any jury instruction with a similar pattern or instruction to the jury.
So do you think it was an appealable issue, and do you think the appeal will go President Trump's way?
I do think that's an appealable issue, and I do think that would go President Trump's way. And in terms of appeals, he can't do any appeal until he's sentenced.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a New York State thing. You guys have to have the finality of the sentencing before you file for any appellate action.
That's correct. And the sentencing is set for July 11th. The district attorney hasn't commented on what the type of sentence he would receive. In this type of context, the minimum sentence for falsifying business records could be just probation or what we call a conditional discharge in New York. Of course, there's a possibility of jail time of 1 of 1 1/3 years up to 4 years for each offense.
Well, with him raising $50 million in 24 hours and them timing the sentencing to be the day before the Republican National Convention, it feels like this judge is trying to sentence him to 4 years in the White House.
Well, it's an interesting juxtaposition of the date he chose for sentencing. It's hard to believe that he did that randomly and not just the day that fit in his schedule.
Do you think he'll reconsider it after seeing the $50 million that his conviction of the former president generated? Like, would you change the timing there? It's backfiring clearly. It's inflaming his base, and I don't think that was their intent.
Well, I don't think the judge will change the date, because then I think it would look even more political than it already looks. To be candid,
Yeah.
I think it would make it look even worse.
Yeah, and Jonathan and I were talking. If this was in Florida, I don't think these charges even get brought, and it gets dismissed, and nothing's ever gone to trial. So, but Ken, any additional thoughts?
At this time, no. Well, one interesting thought:
Yeah.
before he's sentenced, Mr. Trump is going to actually have to meet with a probation officer for a pre-sentencing report. And in New York, generally the probation officers are looking for if he accepts any responsibility for the crimes or regret. And the press conferences will be very interesting how or if they would actually play into whatever report is issued. And that report is used by the judge to help determine what sentence Mr. Trump may or may not get.
Do you think can they do the meeting with the probation officer live?
You mean filmed? It would generally be in person.
Yeah, I mean, saying like maybe schedule it at Mar-a-Lago, charge $10,000 a plate and have everybody show up to watch President Trump meet with his probation officer. I'm just thinking other fundraising opportunities here, Ken.
That may be a very interesting fundraiser. I candidly won't comment on that, but that would be very interesting.
Well, they've given him lemons. Why? It's not his fault if he makes lemonade.
That may be true. That may be true.
Ken, we appreciate you providing the New York insight. What's the weather like up in New York today?
It was a beautiful morning, candidly, and I'm excited to actually enjoy the rest of the day.
Well, hey, I just booked my birthday trip in December, so maybe if you have time to run into the city, maybe we can grab a bite to eat together when I'm up in December.
I look forward to seeing you.
All righty, Ken. Have a great day. All righty, 877-943-9673. The great attorney, Ken Henry, our source for all things New York related. If you have a comment on the Trump conviction, 877-943-9673. Joanne, call back. I saw you up there. I was going to get to you. I just had a guest scheduled. But if you want to call back, Joanne, with your comment, give us a call. 877-943-9673. If you have any legal question at all, the law office is always open for your legal question, whether it's Trump related or not. We're here every Saturday morning to help you with all your legal needs. My philosophy is making legal help accessible to people. So that's why we do this show every Saturday morning. You can call in, talk to a lawyer licensed to practice law in the great state of Florida and get the best legal advice live over the air. 877-943-9673. 877-943-9673. You can also email your questions, patrick@attorneypatricksmith.com, patrick@attorneypatricksmith.com. And I mentioned a few weeks ago when we did our listener's choice segment that we do take listener suggestions for content as well. And lots of you taking us up on that. So we added quite a bit to the queue, and we actually had an entirely different show lined up for this week until Thursday when the President Trump conviction came down. And I got with Joe Weaver and I said, hey, I think we have to bump everything. And he said, I couldn't agree more. I think we need to cover this. So we've got some very exciting shows coming up. And as I mentioned, Attorney Ken Henry made his first appearance on the show during our estate planning around the nation segment, where we compare estate planning laws in Florida to some other jurisdiction. And New York was actually our first segment we did. Then we went on to do Massachusetts with attorney Warren Yanoff. And then we did Pennsylvania with the great attorney Stephanie Kalogridis. And next, we have actually locked up and secured our attorney for the great state of Michigan. And I believe we're doing that show mid-June, I think was what we said. And Joe Weaver was sending me a message that made a good point, kind of echoing the egg on the face comment by Mike. If Trump is in fact reelected, is that not a mandate for revenge? Is that not the people saying, we want this? So when he's carrying it out, he's not just carrying it out for himself. He's carrying out revenge on behalf of the American people. That feels exculpatory, but he does play this narrative of, if they can do this to me, they can do it to you. And so I can see how you can connect those dots. Great point, Joe. Great point. So you can give us a call now with your comment, 877-943-9673. And I gave out the office line early, but if I don't give it out again, I feel like I'll get angry emails. So let me give out the office line. If you want to book your complimentary estate planning consultation with me in the Clearwater office, where I was a long time yesterday, or if you want to be with me in the Sun City Center office, where I will be Tuesday, the Sarasota location, or any other office locations, 844-PATRICK, 844-PATRICK. That's 844-728-7425. And for those of you who just prefer the interwebs, you can go to attorneypatricksmith.com and submit a request for an appointment there as well. The phones have taken off. Let's go to Neil in Plant City. Neil, welcome to the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. What's your comment, Neil?
Morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Patrick. Yeah. Hey, my question is, it's never brought before me, is in July, if he's sentenced to jail and he goes to jail, but in November he's elected, how does he can he run the country that way out of jail? How does all that work?
Yes, as long as he wears the orange jumpsuit and has the ankle monitor on, he can still act as the leader of the free world, Neil. Great question.
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't know how that would work,
What do you think the likelihood he actually goes to jail for any time is?
I think with this judge, I think he's going to sentence him to the max, and there's a point where I think that he's going to get elected and he's going to somehow make it through this.
I disagree, and here's why. I think that if this judge sentences him to the max, he hands President Trump another $50 million in fundraising. And I think he's figured that out. So I think he's figured out, I need to sentence him something, but something that's not going to aid him with $50 million or more in fundraising. And matter of fact, I'll go ahead and go on the record and say now, if he does get sentenced to jail time over this, I think he raises more than $50 million, and his martyrdom skyrockets at this point. So, yeah, I think the judge sees those tea leaves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I hope you're right.
All righty. Well, Neil, we appreciate you calling in, and take care of Plant City, and we'll see you next year at the Strawberry Festival.
All right. Thank you.
Right. Yep. Bye-bye. 877-943-9673. This is the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. I'm your host, Attorney Patrick Smith. Let's go to our regular caller, one of our favorites, Joanne from Sarasota. Joanne, how are the Meadows today?
Well, this whole thing is very emotional.
Aw.
For the country and for people personally. Number one, let's not use dangerous. Let's use formidable for the president.
Formidable. I like that. Okay, agreed. Euphemism. Formidable it is, Joanne.
Because he pardoned Hillary after he went in office, if you'll remember. Do you remember that?
Well, was she charged?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because of all there was a potential with all those.
I don't remember her being charged. I mean, I remember him saying you'd be in jail and I would have you charged, and then he decided not to do that. But I don't remember her actually being charged and then pardoned. But the moral equivalent of a pardon, I'll agree to that.
He said something. Well, anyway, the whole point is, I heard a legal scholar, I believe it was Turley speaking, regarding conviction on federal charges. The jurors must agree, and here's the key, all aspects.
Right.
So in other words, having a smorgasbord to select from, they're not agreeing on all of it.
I agree with you. I mean, I think that was one of the weirdest jury instructions I've ever seen. And, we were booking guests. I just had this thought, Joe. We should have booked a judge. So maybe for our follow-up segment, we book a judge and ask them about jury instructions of that type. We are already planning a follow-up segment. We know this is not going away.
No,
now.
and
We'll be tracking this through November 5th and beyond, I'm sure. So, but great point, Joanne.
And Dershowitz and a lot of legal scholars agree. Also, there seems to be a way to leapfrog over state Supreme Court and go directly to the federal.
Yeah, I agree. There's a whole federal state thing going on here, and I agree with you too on Allen. I think he's mellowed a lot in his later years. He's not as not seemingly as liberal constitutionally as he was in the early days. So
this prosecution is the persecution of a person, and they know he's proud and arrogant, and they want to take him down, but I don't think they'll ever put him in jail.
yeah, but I kind of want a president who's proud and arrogant, Joanne. I'll be
Yeah,
honest
of
with you.
course,
So
of course.
we had a humble president. His name was Jimmy Carter. And it didn't work out great. But anyway, I just want to let you know too, the Cracker Jack producer that is Joe Weaver just did real-time research. Hillary was never charged or indicted.
No, yeah, I know, but after he got in the White House, there was a potential that she would be.
I agree.
And
he did not. Right. I agree.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying.
Well,
so in other words, he said, I don't want to cause her family any grief.
Well, Joanne, you're a treasure and a jewel in the crown that is the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. So we appreciate you calling in and being such a faithful listener. Okay.
Okay, dear. Thank you.
Have
Bye.
a great day. Bye-bye. 877-943-9673. Let's go to Audie in Sarasota. Audie, welcome to the Attorney Patrick Smith Show.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you very much for having Senator Martin on to give us the lowdown about how things should be done.
Oh, you're welcome.
And it occurred to me that our governor, DeSantis, is always on top of things, and the things he does are often copied by governors in all the other states, or most of the other states.
Mm-hmm.
So how about having Governor DeSantis call a special session of the legislature to declare Florida a sanctuary state for American citizens who are victims of not the miscarriage, but the abortion of justice?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. I told Jonathan, I said, hey, if you see, I told him, I said, hey, if you see Ron and he wants to call in and provide insight, the governor's obviously extremely busy running the state. The senators aren't in session right now. But yeah, I did tell him, I said, hey, if the governor wants to call in and provide any insight, he's always welcome to call in and be part of the show. So, but you're right. I think he does take the lead for a lot of other governors in other jurisdictions. And that's because he's a pretty great governor overall. He's not perfect. And I've had my disagreements with some of his policies, but you take the good with the bad. I mean, no, you're never going to have a perfect governor. At the end of the day, is the state better off now than when he came into office? Yeah, I think overall we are. And that makes a good governor for me. And I was asked that question yesterday about president. What makes a good president? Is the country better off at the end of their administration than at the start? And that's sort of my test for presidents and governors or any political office. How does it look at the end of your term versus the beginning of your term? Not how do you look at the end of the term. I think most politicians, especially presidents, if you notice those time-lapse photos, they age so much. If you can imagine the stress on their minds as the leader of the free world, it's breathtaking how much the images of Barack Obama, especially. I mean, he aged a lot in those 8 years, and the idea of a guy like FDR, because I think he was elected. He had served 12 years, I think, and he was elected for 4 more and then passed away. But that would have been 16 years of presidency. And that's a long time. But yeah, Audie, great comments.
Yeah, it's punishment, but it's not this kind of punishment. And I would never say that Ron DeSantis was an imperfect governor any more than I would say Trump was an imperfect president.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you just said nobody's perfect, but we gauge our opinion by whether the people are better off after their term.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't. Do you think Governor DeSantis was a perfect governor?
I just wouldn't say he was imperfect.
Oh, look at you!
Because my overall assessment is it's just fine.
Okay, all right. Well, I listen. That's called a pivot. What you did there, Audie, and you may have a future in politics with an answer like that. Like, is he guilty? I didn't say he was not guilty. So yeah, all right. Well, Audie, we appreciate you calling in. Thanks for being a fantastic caller, and thanks for your kind words about Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. 877-943-9673. This is the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. I'm your host, Attorney Patrick Smith. We kicked it off, as Audie pointed out, with Senator Jonathan Martin representing Florida's District 33 down in Lee County, providing some insight. Then we talk to our buddy Ken Henry, a New York State attorney, getting the New York State insight on the Trump convictions. Next, we're going to Spring Hill, and we're going to talk to Mark. Mark, welcome to the Attorney Patrick Smith Show.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, Mark. What's going on?
Let me get rid of the radio. 1 second, I'm sorry.
Good idea.
Yeah. There it goes. Thank you, I'm sorry. I was listening to the conversation regarding Trump and being sentenced on the 11th and the National Convention on the 12th. And the fact that he's going to see a probation officer in between. And I think we all believe that Trump is not going to show any remorse or whatnot for what he's been convicted of, because we all know he's not guilty. That being said, if he's sentenced to do time on the 11th, will they in fact incarcerate him overnight to process him? And therefore, would he miss the National Convention?
I think all that's completely possible. Now, here's my question back to you, Mark. That happens. Do you think that helps or hurts the president?
Well, that all depends if he can get a Zoom call from being incarcerated.
No.
I definitely think it would help them.
Right, because think about the RNC, where your nominee is in jail. That is the stuff of legend. And in terms of outcry, and outcry equals donations and fundraising. It's this weird world we live in where to hurt someone actually helps them. And it's this sort of backwards commentary on where we are in the political process right now. So, Mark, I think that's a real possibility. And I think it's going to be more political theater. And I think it's also, and this is just me being a cynic, I think it's designed to sell newspapers. And I'm a part of media, and I'm saying that. So, listen.
I kind of believe you. I kind of believe what you're saying is true. And I think if he goes to jail, it'll just, his narrative that he's a political prisoner will be amplified magnificently.
Well,
and
so do you think, in almost like an MLK fashion, if he goes to jail, like he writes a letter from the Birmingham jail, like MLK did? I don't know what jail he would be at. Would they send him to like Rikers?
Yeah, Rikers is the only action. Well, if it's Manhattan, he could go to the Tombs also.
So, and Joe Weaver made the point, every letter is about the Democrats using the judicial system as a political weapon, and he's writing letters from prison. Maybe more like the Apostle Paul. Should that have been my comparison? I don't know. I'm gonna get angry emails now. I shouldn't have said that, Mark. All right. So, Mark, great point.
Good media. That's good media.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I'll leave the jokes to the professionals. I should stay away from that. We will follow up, though, and that show that we do around that time, we'll certainly do a piece about it, Mark. But we appreciate you calling in from Spring Hill, and thanks for listening to the show.
Can you send me back to your producer for a second, please?
Sure. Well, put you back on hold, and you can talk to Joe.
Thank you.
All righty. 877-943-9673. 877-943-9673. I don't know that I've ever had any caller ask to talk to the producer. That's interesting. Joe, let me know how that goes. So 877-943-9673. This is the Attorney Patrick Smith Show. I'm your host, Attorney Patrick Smith. We're with you every Saturday morning to answer your legal questions, to make legal advice accessible. We also like to make estate planning accessible. So we offer our affordable flat fee estate planning packages, our non-tax, which is for estates of less than 13.6 million. Our non-tax trust packages, $695. Yes, you heard right. $695 for the trust, pour over will, power of attorney, healthcare surrogate, living will, deed for the homestead. That's for a single person or a married couple doing the same plan. Again, the same rate for our simple will, $75, and our power of attorney, $95. Our simple living will, $50. We make those fees flat and affordable to make estate planning accessible to you. So if you want to give us a call at the office next week, we will be open on Monday at 8 a.m. and you can book your complimentary estate planning consultation. That number, 844-PATRICK, 844-PATRICK, or 844-728-7425. 844-728-7425 or 844-PATRICK. All right, let's go to Punta Gorda and we're going to talk to Bruce. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Bruce. What's going on?
All right, I got a lot that I'd like to point out about this situation with Donald Trump. Take the name Donald Trump away from the whole case. Just eliminate the name Donald Trump. It's just a rich guy that and forgive me, I'm not trying to be offensive, but some things I say might be offensive to some people.
Okay, hold on. Before you go, since you gave that disclaimer, just keep it clean. We have a lot of families that listen. We're on 14 or 15 stations, Bruce, so there's a lot of families listening right now. Keep it very clean for broadcast, but I agree with you. We're removing Trump. It's Mr. X is being tried, okay?
Yeah, what I mean by offensive is in certain parts of the country, some people would consider Donald Trump to be a grifter. And then in some parts of the country, some people think him to be a great man. Well, eliminate all that. He is a rich man, okay, being whatever he is, that's on trial for this, what's going on here, a jury trial of supposedly his peers. Well, how many of them people on that jury were wealthy? Whether they're billionaires or not, he is a wealthy man. How many people on that jury were wealthy people?
Well, that was the joke I made with Senator Martin at the top of the show. I said one of the funniest comments I heard about this was he was tried by a jury of his peers, and someone said, I had no idea that there were so many former presidential billionaires in Manhattan.
Absolutely.
Great point.
And that goes to point out the flaws in this jury system that we have in this country that is, to me is it's never worked. It can't work. It only works when people get what they feel is right. You know, the jury got it wrong when they found O.J. Simpson guilty. You know what I'm saying?
Not guilty.
When
the jury found the juice not guilty.
I'm sorry.
Not guilty. That's right.
I meant not guilty.
That's right.
But as a convicted felon myself, how come when the jury found me guilty, nobody was saying they were wrong? I was guilty. Okay, I'm a convicted felon. I was convicted of felony in 1994, the only time I've ever been arrested in my life. I am a registered Democrat in the state of Florida because I can't register as an independent. Okay, so when Donald Trump became a president, I was in the tax bracket under $150,000 a year, but over 75. Okay. My W-4 that I filled out at my job that I had worked at for 12 years, nothing changed in the 12 years that I worked there until Donald Trump became president.
Hey, Bruce, I got to cut you loose. I'm coming up on the end of the show, but I love that you took ownership of your actions, and it sounds like you've turned your life around, and we're all proud of you, and thanks for being a great listener to the show. Okay, Bruce?
The point is what I'm saying is the Democrats are turning me into a Trumper.
Okay.
That's my long story short.
Well, Bruce, we celebrate your journey and your transition. 877-943-9673. That's your number for next week to call into the show. John, if you want to hang on the line, I'll talk to you off the air. To reach me at the office next week, Monday morning at 8 a.m., you can call in 844-PATRICK, 844-PATRICK, and that's 844-728-7425. If you want to call and schedule your complimentary estate planning consultation in Clearwater, Sun City Center, Sarasota, any of our other office locations, one easy number, 844-PATRICK or 844-728-7425. God bless, stay safe, and go Gators.